Hey, welcome, folks. I'm like watching this Rolodex of names come in down from the weight room, and it's beautiful. Um, thank you all for being here, whether this is your first moment with us today, or you've been here all today, or the rest of the chat. I'm looking at Nidhi, who I got a beautiful email from earlier. Thank you, Nidhi, for your email. Thank you all for your just words of affirmation and love and feedback. They've been so meaningful and like holding this up. I've received so many beautiful emails that each I'm just gonna print out, and anytime I feel lack of trust in life or myself, I'm just gonna read. um, and that's part of this movement, right? Here we are on Valentine's Day, listening to this cry from the future, and we're really excited to be listening to the cry for village and really tracking the emergence of village that's happening, this global movement that so many of our speakers, our panelists here have been tracking and supporting. And it's going to be a really juicy topic, and I feel like in some ways, Ian, Julia, and I made this film, The Village of Lovers, because of our own longings for village. And this is recognizing after especially going to Tamara that really it was like a structural shift in the fundament of how we live from isolated nuclear family that for many of us was even like harmful at times, in like nuclear family nation state into this place of village, which is how most of our ancestors lived for the majority of human history. Um, and so we believe that is part of global system change, part of sacred activism, which we're going to get into the hows and the whys and what people are tracking. So I'm going to start with introducing our beautiful speakers for this panel, and then pass it over to them. So I'm going to go from my left, just doing this intuitively here, and introduce Kim Canny. And I hope I'm saying your name right. I got it this time. Okay, great. Kim is the co-executive director of the Foundation for Intentional Community. She's been living in intentional communities for over 12 years. She is passionate about like how these communities can combat isolation, loneliness, ecological collapse, social injustice. She lives and is coming in from the Sandhill Farm community in Missouri, doing a whole bunch of really fun stuff that maybe you can tell us about as the panel starts, because villaging isn't only about work. So with that, I'll pass it over to my right on the screen, which is Jamaica Stevens, who's a dear friend. She's been supporting us behind the scenes, making this summit happen. She's the co-founder of the Open Future Coalition, developing social, technological, and economic tools for local community resilience and cooperative global learning. Holy shnikes, we haven't even talked about that much, Jamaica. That's so cool. And we first heard about her through her work, this book, Re-inhabiting the Village, Co-creating Our Future, which is like a collection of stories and essays around the principles and ethics of village. I know that Ian, I think, had an essay in there that kind of was linked to the film, perhaps. And she's a facilitator, storyteller, ritual theater person, a creatrix of all kinds. And she's so committed to weaving together the human and natural worlds into integrated systems of ecological and human thriving. And so grateful you are here, even though you have a little bit of a cold. Hope this supports your healing vibes. Next to her right on my screen, we have Zamir. Oh my gosh, I hope I say your last name right. Please correct me if I don't. Zamir Danji, is that correct?
Good enough. Yeah.
Okay, you can, when it comes to you again, you can say Zamir is a interdisciplinary educator, visionary, and healer dedicated to unlocking human potential and contributing to a society that works for all. The passion for culture change, consciousness, and design thinking, he creates spaces for transformation and illuminates pathways to desirable futures, which is our topic here. This is taking shape in the form of The Gift, a social architecture for cultural awakening that supports humans to live according to their most noble and authentic expression. He's currently part of the leadership team of Awake, a living laboratory for conscious living in Costa Rica. And Zamir, is that where you're coming in from? You're here from Costa
Yes,
Rica.
if you could see the view from where my eyes are looking at, steps away from me is a beautiful river, paradise with birds and pineapples, and I'm living the dream. I'm in Costa Rica, full pura vida.
Wow. Well, amazing. Thank you for
So
bringing that
blessed.
us.
Yeah.
And he's a friend also from British Columbia, where I was living, where Ian lives. And our next and final panelist is actually going to be our moderator. I'm going to step back and pass it in a moment to Jasper Circus. Jasper is the co-founder of Revillager, a platform for modern village making, as well as the writer of the Revillaging 101 guidebook and the host of the Revillager podcast. He's also a steward of a beautiful intentional community on Vancouver Island called the Shire, which I've spent some time at. He's dedicated the last 15 years of his life towards experiencing, researching, and learning how to revillage and how to apply that to our current world and culture using emerging technologies in harmony with ancient wisdoms. He helps to bridge the gap between our growing epidemic of loneliness and disconnection and help people weave intentional community wherever they may find themselves. I'm so stoked. Thank you all for being here. With that, I'm going to pass it, Jasper, over to you. You can take us away into whatever emergent dialogue wants to happen here. Thank you.
Thanks, John. Really appreciate it. Really appreciate all the work you've been doing, all the team, and yeah, I'm just like so excited for this. This is so cool to be doing this conversation. Zamir is an old friend of mine. Jamaica's a new friend. Kim, I've been wanting to talk to you for a while. So yeah, this is really special for me, and I'm really honored to be invited to moderate and to hold the space and to have a awesome conversation. And I'm sure it'll be lively. And of course, many directions we can go with this. And of course, I always like to start from the center of where I am. So the revillaging movement. It's a big concept. It's a big thing. And in my own journey, I spent 15 years yearning for village, traveling the world, trying to find village and living in different villages and learning about them and studying ancient ways and just like trying to find every little nugget of wisdom and practice that I could to help support this dream. And 5 years ago, I actualized that dream with my family, with my child and my wife, and became a co-steward of this intentional community I'm in now. Um, and wow, is it a hard, challenging experience. You think you arrived to the dream and it's kind of there for you. And even though I was so resourced and had so many tools and so much knowledge, like when rubber hit the road, it was a completely different experience. And with lots of things in life, we have to actually experience it. We have to actually practice what we're learning about in order to actually grow in it. And one of the things that's so interesting that I've found is that there's all these incredible communities around the world working on this question of how to be in village. Even the concept of revillaging, right? It's coming back to this way that we've been. And I think we can all acknowledge that village is definitely inherent in the way humans evolved and the way, in a sense, we're meant to live. However, we've been divorced from that in our current culture, and we're trying to find our way back. And that movement in itself has been happening, for 50, 60 years. And as we're trying to figure this out, what I feel like is, in my own experience, being in a community, it's so challenging. There's so much work to be done just to hold the harmony of a village, of a social fabric in one community. Then to scale out, to then scope out and look and see that there's all of these communities, all of these nodes around the world, and we have to figure out, how do we bridge that? How do we create the mycelial web of these communities so that we can actually start to create more of a movement, and start to apply what we've learned in these microcosms into the macrocosm. And you can see the mirror of the challenges and also the triumphs of village in the revillaging movement as a whole, and how big it is from, the individual experience to the collective experience. So with that, generally people either have kind of a glamorization of revillaging as, coming back to something we've lost, and it's just the perfect way to be. And once you're there, it's, you know, it's the way it's meant to be. You've found paradise, as it were. And then on the other side, there's the stigma of, okay, you live in a village, you must be a cult, or, you know, you're living in this old way that we've grown out of. And then I'm trying to find this middle ground of how do we acknowledge the realities of this movement and what it takes to be in village and apply that into our current cultural moment. And so I'm curious, you know, what is the framing, and I'd love to hear from each of you on this. What is the framing that makes sense for you of what revillaging actually means in this current moment we're in? And the bigger concept of this conversation, I think, is how do we apply it into our everyday life? How do we apply it into the modern world? Whether we live in an eco village or we live in a city, in an apartment building, in a neighborhood, and how do we bring that into the future? How do we scale this and allow more accessibility to people who right now may feel quite distant from it? So to bring that all into kind of more succinct question, you know, what does revillaging mean to you? What does revillaging mean to you in your life right now, and how you think people can access it in this world? And I will start with you, Jamaica, if you're open to starting.
Sure. Yeah, what a sweet intro. It's just sort of letting your words wash over like a lovely waterfall. Thank you, Jasper. And really lovely to be with all of you here today. I feel like it's important for us to start from acknowledgement of place. My original homelands are the waters of the Columbia River watershed, the land of the traditional lands of the Chinook people. And I currently am stewarding 65 acres with my husband, who's a regenerative farmer, on the back slopes of Mount Spokane, on original territories of Spokane people in the Blanchard Creek Valley. It's a very sweet place, kind of almost to Canada and Washington. And I'm currently in my office where my child goes to school in our neighboring community of Sandpoint, Idaho, where the Kalispels people have traditionally been the stewards of this place. Gosh, your question's so lovely and big. I think a couple of things that were starting to sparkle in that were, one, I think of village as a verb. I think of it as a daily choice of practice and mindset of interconnectedness and interdependence. Definitely through re-inhabiting the village, we were collecting these stories, these intercultural, multi-generational stories of sort of extrapolating or articulating, more importantly, the principles, the kind of codes or ethics of what village is and how do we apply it. And I think for me, it's more than a place, and it's more than even a practice. It's a set of deeply held principles of that sort of multi-generational, intergenerational coherence, holding people from cradle to grave. And then honestly, in the renewal cycle of many, many, many generations, and thinking with that longevity of being a good ancestor and considering the future ones. And I think also just the practices of like radical interdependence and sort of the integralness of like we each have a gift to share and to give, and then like reciprocity is such a huge important part of everything that we do. And so it doesn't almost matter where you apply it, it's more the way you are and move and live through the world with your choice and action to align a set of values and principles that then it can be and should be, for the sake of diversity, as many beautiful expressions of village as possible, and also holding village not only as antiquity, but really thinking about village as a verb, as our continuity of relationship from our ancient, roots and ancestors, all the way through how we can reimagine what village continues to mean as we go into a future together. So that is one part I would share, is that like village is a verb and a set of principles. And the other thing that was really shining for me was, for me, currently sort of living in a lot of villages. I've been a consultant for a lot of villages. I've helped start villages, help villages midwife or transition or die well. I've, supported so many communities, lived in communities, practiced it. Right now, currently living not in community, with more of my like nuclear family on a homestead, kind of remote. And at that stage of my life, I didn't expect that I would not be in village at this point, raising my second child. She's 6 and knows more plant species than I do. But what I recognized was it was sort of this perfect opportunity to recalibrate my sense of village as my like human relationships and connection, and to really continue to integrate myself as a part of a living system, and really form a relationship of communion with the non-human community and village that I get to cohabitate with and steward and love and share and learn from. And it was this incredible opportunity of kind of devoid of so much human connection, which I still have plenty online. I do a lot of work globally around the world. I'm always with people. It's great. But to really have time to sink into what is my relationship with the white-tailed deer that move through our meadow, or the elk that come and kind of surprise us every so often. We're like, oh my gosh, the elk are here, or like the return of the geese that come in the spring, or these different relationships with noticing I come from the land of cedar and moss, and we're right at the edge of the cedar zone, and like, what's the dynamic and relationship of those guilds of trees out here versus like where they're like just thriving and flourishing on a more coastal range. It just changed my landscape. I was already aware of us re-inhabiting not only the village in the human sense, but re-inhabiting the sense of interdependence, reciprocity, and interconnectedness with life, with ourselves as a living system. I was already migrating myself from village to like, wait a minute, it's something even more comprehensive. And that is this sense of we're woven with all of life. But it was really profound to then go put that into real daily practice of communion with life, because kind of quieting the human relationships and recentering more of an ecocentric lens. So I think that's where I arrive at village now, is this place of its communion and its stewardship and its reciprocity and its accountability, quite frankly, and responsibility to really show up and be like, right, like we are part of this integrated fabric, and it's time for us to align with and show up for and as a more integrated, intelligent, loving, cooperative system. And so that's really then reframed how, when I do work with communities, or right now, a lot of our work is focused on creating sort of bioregional hubs for resilience and regeneration, and kind of resourcing local communities to self-organize and have the resources they need to either get ahead of coming transition and adaptation, or address it in a crisis type moment when they're faced with needing to rebound from some sort of situation, and also to reimagine and revision for the futures that we want for our communities. So I'm applying it really practically, but the way that John framed this is so much more than like, how do you apply village, and like, what work are you doing that promotes village and, encourages communities to sort of thrive and flourish together? Because he asked us, like, what's really at the heart of it? I wanted to answer from the question of like, everything I do now really has this constant barometer of like, is this part of an integrated, like life affirming, like, path? And is anything that we're doing actually serving the waters? And is it actually serving future generation? Is it actually like making viable paths right now for humans to contribute their gifts in a thoughtful way as a restorer species, and heal our fractured relationship with the living earth, and become again, like return ourselves as people of place to the community waiting for us to remember the songs and the stories and the languages we forgot, and that a lot of people still remember, and want to acknowledge the intactness of village that has a lot to teach us about some of us that forgot and are trying to remember. So I think I'll just leave it at that. I'll start meandering otherwise, but I just think for me, it's sort of like, it's practice, it's principle, but it's just like a fundamental shift of the frame entirely. And it's actually completely changing the narrative and conversation to one of like healing and wholeness and reciprocity and integration with life. And from that, anything we do that we apply to village, to me, is just sort of like the juicy cherry on top of putting it into real life practice. I think that's probably plenty for now. Thank you.
Well, yeah, really well said. There's a lot there. That was a deep journey of, yeah, I really like the village as a verb. I really like that. And I know I've heard you speak about the non-human connection of village, and that's really interesting to me to kind of bring out the yeah, just that meta way of being with communion and with connection. And obviously, what the summit's been really coming back to again and again is this shift in consciousness, and shift in how we think about, our connection. And also I'll reflect yes, village is intact. You know, there are so many places where village is intact, and we speak to it as a place of yearning to those of us who are lost, you know, as Stephen Jenkinson says, the kind of cultural orphans. Um, so, I mean, maybe I can pass it off to you, Zamir, as someone who comes from a culture with a lot of that still intact, and also someone who's really thinking about the consciousness of connection, relationally, and you know, connection to self, and how that connects to the community and perhaps even the Sangha.
Thank you for sharing that, and thank you, Jamaica, for that sharing of yours. As I was listening, it sparked a few thoughts. One, which is, I'm curious the degree to which we are maybe intentionally revillaging. And when I say that by, you know, I remember listening to the words, it was a speech by, I think it was Bill McKibben, and it was at the Bioneers Conference. And he said something about, you know, humanity's immune response, like Gaia's immune response, basically self-organizing through us. There's this sort of this immune system that is, it's an impulse, like it's happening through us. And some of this work now for people like Robert Sapolsky, who are talking about biological determinism, like so much of what we think is free will is actually our biology that is acting through us. And I'm curious how much of this is a biological intelligence that is saying this is what's needed at this time, and it's pushing through to us. And I always love this teaching of the Hopi people that you have two dances in life. You have the survival dance and you have your sacred dance. And I've seen it on an individual level. You know, our survival dance is, you know, what nature is primed for. Our nervous system really only has one priority, and that's to keep us alive. You know, that's its first thing. And it's developed such an intelligence faster, more perceptive than our rational mind. It has to be, right? And so I'm wondering how much of it is just us listening to the survival dance of nature. And it's that if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, to go together. And so we know that in this time, we're going to need to know what together is. We're going to need to be networked. We know it on some deep intuitive level. And there's this sense of like, whoa, do we know how to do that? Who are my people? Like that Hopi prophecy, like push off into the center of the river and say, who's in the boat with you, right? Where do you know where your food and water is? Like there's this sense of us that knows like this is primary. And then there's the sacred dance part of the revillaging, which is where it gets exciting and more almost on the abstract and intellectual level. And we want to realize this ideal, you know, and humans are driven by an ideal. I was talking with Ian yesterday, and he said a quote that's guided him for the last 10 years is something like, if you want to get people to build a ship, don't give them tools and wood, but teach them to long for the endless longing of the sea, right? And so I think there's this longing that we feel because we've heard about this village, like this ideal state. And it's as old as we know. We've heard about Eden, the myth of Eden, and these perfect places. And I'm curious, will we ever find it? I don't know, but we have to believe in it to even seek it out. And so maybe there's this demystifying of that we're ever going to find that beautiful womb-like village where we're all safe always and connected. And maybe that's not what it's about, you know. Maybe it's about something else. And I'm leaning into that as I live in an emerging village community here in Costa Rica and in Awake. And it's really interesting to be here because a lot of it comes down to me about growing up. Like, I think we're all learning to grow up, like becoming more mature and more mature and more mature. And I find the villaging process is requiring me to be more sensitive, a better listener. I'm reminding myself that God gave me 2 ears and 1 mouth. And I'm reminded that again and again. The village is teaching me that, you know, like it requires us to do that. And, you know, the kind of rugged individualism of thinking, really putting yourself first, it doesn't work in community. And so what does it mean to inhabit that outside of the bloodline relationships? Because I've been fortunate, my family is like a little village community, you know, and And we have a large extension around my extended family that are non-blood related, and we feel like there's this kind of community and village. But I don't think most people have that, you know. So when they come to live with groups of other people that are not of their blood, they're trying to restore the brokenness of things that, you know, they didn't get in the family context. And so our wounds come up around that, and we need to heal it. And so again, I feel like it's, and I'll tie it up here because I know everybody else has interesting things to say, but I've noticed that, you know, nature evolution moves towards higher orders of complexity, and greater levels of wholeness. And we're just participating in that. And because if we set a spiritual intent in our heart saying, we want to wake up, we want to evolve, you know, and so the universe will put maybe a number of us in these new relational containers that accelerate it. And I think that we find that happening. And so what I think the challenge is in revillaging is confronting the ways in which we've been become an economic being. That's what I find to be very challenging. We're like a homo economicus now, and it's pretty challenging because in order for a market to prevail, it needs to disembed humans from its environment and social relationships in order for this thing called a market to regulate everything, you know. And so, and it's difficult because we don't know what it's like to live re-embedded with our ecology and with each other, like truly. And I think that was the context of villages before, but I don't know. How does that look in the future? I don't know, but I think we rub up against that again and again. So I think those are some of the challenges we face. And I think a shift in the feminine priority around relationship is integral to that. And I'm trying to learn about that more.
Thanks, Amir. Yeah, hearing that, I think about, you know, some of the themes throughout the summit and throughout Village of Lovers around the domination culture and how to heal through that. And in my own experience and speaking to a lot of people that are on this journey of trying to remember, there's a real grief, there's a real pain in the lack of eldership. You know, we look at intact villages and traditions and cultures. There's story, there's eldership, there's ritual, there's song, there's dance, there's all of these incredible pieces that hold the weave. So that when they do come up against the big hard stuff, they have something really holding them. And, you know, it acts as a guiding post or a compass in those seas where you're, you know, trying to get somewhere, and you get to do the sacred dance in that space. And it feels like for a lot of us, we are in that survival dance stage, you know, just trying to figure out how to make it work, while also acknowledging that we all are yearning for this sacred place in ourselves and in the community with each other. But not having elders and not having a template and not being able to look around and see, you know, a lot of successful stories in terms of the revillaging movement. And, you know, that's something I'd love to hear from you, Kim. You know, Foundation for Intentional Community is this incredible network of communities. And I don't know, but I imagine the fact that communities, you know, are more aware of each other now than perhaps ever. You know, this is a really important step in the kind of mycelial reweaving, and also how we learn together. You know, as the forest communicates through that mycelial web, it's like, how do we communicate? Because if one community is learning something, how can we make sure that everyone is learning that together? And, you know, a beautiful part of Tamara is that they came up with this practice of forum, and now it's being exported. They just did it at my community, and now we're doing it, you know, every other week. And I'm like, oh, perfect. This is exactly, you know, how I imagine this thing weaving itself. Especially with the lack of eldership, and that we're all trying to reinvent the wheel separately and isolated in a lot of ways. So yeah, I'd love to hear your thoughts and experience in this kind of networking effect of the revillaging movement and your own personal experience as well in your community.
Yeah, thank you. That was such a sweet segue into all the things that I would love to share in this space. And And hi, I'm just sinking in because I was listening so intently that I'm finding my voice now. Um, it's interesting to be in this space with you all where, because my relationship to FIC and FIC's relationship to the intentional communities movement, the term revillaging is not one that I've actually used a lot. And I think some of that is because the Foundation for Intentional Communities kind of holding this bigger piece of um, what community looks like in a lot of different ways, and that can be co-living with a group of people in a home in an urban setting. It could be co-housing, where people own their own homes and are also likely in urban settings but have community shared spaces. There's the like kind of rural egalitarian income sharing kind of commune version, and then villages. And so I'm really curious about the term and how we're using it, and also in the FIC space where we're kind of holding this big thing and mostly talking about residential intentional community, but also with the recognition that, gosh, we form communities all over the place. Jamaica, you were saying you don't have community. Oh, you have community for sure, because we create it everywhere we go. And so there's, whereas while FIC might be really focused on residential intentional community, we're also here supporting just cooperative culture in general and kind of really wanting to bring in those threads, because we know that when it exists in us and when it exists in these spaces that we create, it's everywhere. We bring it everywhere. And Jasper, you were asking about FIC's kind of role in being this sort of mycelial network. And I think we've been holding this for a long time, but it's becoming stronger and stronger that we really we can be this resource hub, and we can also be a networking space. And so we don't need to be the voice, but a container for the voices, and let it be a place where we can share the resources that we have, and we want to hear yours as well. And we can bring people in and say, let's gather and let's have conversation and learn from one another. I often like to say, if FIC is sort of the community of communities, then we are the common house. We might be where the library exists, and game night, and potluck, and where we have the hard conversations and where we learn and grow from one another. So we're kind of holding that as the container. And boy, I could say a whole lot more about that, but I think I'll stop there, so you have just a sense of how we think about holding this as a bigger picture, and where FIC and where just the community intentional communities movement fits into this bigger picture of this like epidemic of isolation and loneliness, and what we're all sort of hungry for.
Mhm.
And not always sure exactly how to go about it. But on a personal note, I feel like we instinctually as humans do know how to do this, and we have to just sort of relearn and sometimes unlearn some of the social conditioning that we've had, so that it can get messy. I've been writing notes, and when you asked Jasper about like, there's the glamorization of revillaging, and then there's the cult sort of other end of the spectrum, and what's in the middle. And I just wrote being messy, like like I think that the more we can show up authentically and messy and recognize that we will mess up, then we come to a place where we can start unpacking these things. I saw this too in the film, Village of Lovers, have like, once people started opening up to the idea of love and eros, they realized, oh, this is actually really messy. And so they created the forum. And so whether it's social constructs or governance systems or just how humans relate to each other, let's let it kind of unravel for a minute, and then figure out where we go from there. And a lot of the resources that we have and that we're talking about are on the shoulders of the people who have had those experiences and want to talk about it. So hooray for us. We're several decades into this learning, and can and have something to grow from. Yeah. yeah, I think I'll stop there. And Jasper, I want to hear from you too on the original question of what it means for you and the reframing of Revillage.
Yeah, well, it's been a journey. It's been a journey, and the concept has changed a lot for me over the years. And I've been part of a project called Revillager for 4 years, and I'm certainly questioning that word, how it relates to people. And I really appreciate what you shared about, this wider context of community, because to me, that is in my heart what I'm called to, is understanding what is the wider context of community. With the Surgeon General putting out this loneliness epidemic report, which is massive, a mainstream medical report saying it's more health dangerous than cancer and heart disease and it's smoking. Just it's incredible that's out there. And so, it might take some time, as it did with, tobacco and stuff, to like start to permeate the wider culture of this is really important. We need to look at this. But when I say revillaging to a lot of people who aren't kind of part of this niche and subculture, it can turn people off really quickly, for a variety of reasons, and I get it. And I really feel in my deepest truth right now that the revillaging movement, and again, we can name it whatever we want to name it, but we're calling it that for the sake of this conversation. It's gonna happen in a large part in the cities, in the densely populated places of the world. There's beautiful things happening out in these rural spaces, where I am, and in beautiful tropical spaces and land. And going back to the land is very important for sure. Our relationship tending to our way with the land is huge for a lot of us who didn't grow up that way. However, there's so much opportunity for community right now in these densely populated spaces, in the cities, in the suburbs. I mean, an apartment building can be a village in itself, and I've lived in a lot of collective homes in cities, and cul-de-sacs, these like perfectly shaped circular housing situations. And I don't know if you know Mark Lakeman out of Portland, but he does all this amazing work in setting up, what is the architecture, what is the physical space of village when we're understanding it in the context of a city or a neighborhood. So for me, revillaging has these various layers. It has the spiritual consciousness of how we relate to each other, how we become part of a collective, a community. It has the mental space of how do we organize ourselves? How do we share resources? How do we actually get this mechanism to make sense? It has the emotional pieces of how do we acknowledge the trauma that we're all holding? How do we get messy with each other, allow ourselves to be seen in our messiness, in our failures, in our mistakes, and have tools and resources to hold that? And it has the physical, which is the space that you're in, and how you relate to it. And I don't think it has to be anywhere in particular, as you were saying, Jamaica, earlier. So I'm definitely widening my breadth of understanding of what this movement is and how to really connect more with people on a way that they can understand. I really believe in meeting people where they're at and making it digestible. And I think in a lot of ways, this movement has isolated itself in terms of how it communicates what it is, and it can be seen very quickly to be, just not for everyone kind of feeling. And that's sad because I'm like, well, I really believe that community is for everyone. I really, really do. Maybe you're a monk and you want to go be alone for years, but you're still going to have your Sangha. Like you're still going to come back to community. So yeah, that's kind of where I'm at with it. And I'm really curious about another question, but I see your hand up, Zamir. I'd love to hear what you have to share.
Well, I just thought of this because I have spent good amounts of time in the monasteries. I would go every summer whenever all my friends were going to festivals. I was going to the monastery, and that was a big shift for me because I used to be into the festival culture, and then I shifted. And I remember always having that pang, be like, sitting in the monastery, be like, everybody's at Blessed Coast right now, right? And it'd be like, and I'm here chopping wood and sitting on my meditation cushion with a few monks in the middle of nowhere in remote British Columbia. And it was very enriching, you know, to be in a sangha where we were committed to a daily practice, and it's a subtle, non-sexy, non-glamorized village. You know, you live together, you chop wood, carry water. Everybody has their simple tasks. You live a very simple life. You meditate together twice a day. You listen to the Dharma teachings, and it's just like natural, right? And I remember that being contrasted to the like, I don't know, the festival culture, friends, community, which is like all revillaging and events and stuff like that. And then contrasting it with the simplicity of a monastic life, where that's the only way to be. Like that's just how you're going to come together and live that way. We might call that a sangha. And I don't know if I would translate sangha to village. It wouldn't. They're a different thing. A sangha is a community of practice. And I remember someone sharing with me, I think it was a study or something done by the Eco Village Network. I'm sure one of you would know better than me, but what they were saying was one of the most important things for the success of an intentional community is a shared practice. Like it's really essential. And so where do we draw the line between, you know, what is it that people center around? You know, we live in a time where our values, our mythologies, our cultures are so diverse and fracted. Like, what are we uniting around as a shared kind of understanding or practice, right? Someone said why ritual is so fundamental, but for some people, ritual is a religious thing. In Sanskrit, ritual comes from the word rhythm, which means the laws of nature. It's rooted in the root of the word rhythm. So that which brings us in alignment, our body and mind in accord with the way of nature, the Dharma or the Tao, right? And so that's the etymology of it. And so I've been thinking on this loneliness epidemic that there's people ascribe it to the like a loss of lack of purpose. But that's just one part. The research has shown that purpose is not enough to give you happiness in life. You know, like it can become an obsessive pursuit of self-fulfillment, you know, like finding your purpose. But that's one part of it. That's why people love video games, right? It gives you a purpose. And then the second one is that it has a sense of coherence. So you can make sense of like the laws and rules that govern this little world that you're in accord with. Because for a lot of people, they're like, this world is not coherent. Like it doesn't make sense. Like they don't understand how it works or why it works. Nobody's explained it to them. Even me growing up until like 30 years old, I didn't even understand how credit worked. I had an awful credit card rating. It's like nobody explained to me like how this whole economic thing works, right? Like how do some people succeed and other people don't? Like people don't have a set of coherence. In a game, it's like, these are the rules and this is how you can get it and figure it out and win. And then there's a normative aspect of it where there's a possibility of once you have the coherence, like how to level up, like how to improve your stature or improve your knowledge or understanding or your level of service or recognition within this, right? And there's a path to that, and human beings need that. And then the fourth one is the state of flow. You can access a flow state. And these are like these four things that we're really looking for. And the modern corporation was like the promise of the village, like of the last industrial civilization, right? It's like, you know, come here and this is the purpose, and the purpose is what the corporation says, right? And then, you know, there's coherence because this is how we operate. This is our rules and structures, and these are the ways in which things operate. And then here's how you can move up the ladder and level up. And I don't think they care much about flow, but you know, where do we find is Village providing a structure where it provides a new way of organizing and meeting these fundamental needs for people? Like, in what context will this be met? And where is that like a real solid, like intact village versus, as you said, it might just be hanging out in a cul-de-sac. And it could just be a loose, vibey neighborhood connection thing. And maybe there's a spectrum. That's the kind of what I'm leading to. There's like this spectrum, and there's people that are going like the Tamara, the deep research into that. But it doesn't mean you have to go all the way to there to still enact village and have some of those needs met, right? And there seems to be this wide spectrum of this whole project and question. And I think all of us have been moving through this spectrum. Some all the way here, some be like, nah, I think maybe I'm more comfortable over here. Some people are more comfortable over here. We just need to make space for all of it.
Absolutely. And with any spectrum, if you are over on one side, to get to the other side, you don't generally want to jump. Or it can be very abrasive, very jarring. You want to kind of gradually shift over. And that kind of makes me think about what is the onboarding process, from this state of disconnection we're in as a culture to this ideal situation that I agree we probably will never get to this perfect ideal, but this ideal of we're all connected and we're all feeling a sense of belonging and a sense of trust and a sense of purpose. What is the onboarding for those people that are so disconnected, don't have friends that they trust or don't have many? And obviously we're living in a hyper digital age where a lot of those needs are met in, more shallow ways, perhaps. And I'll also speak just real quickly to, how do we connect the children, with these communities, and how do we connect with the elders? I saw in the chat a few people were like, what do you mean there's no elders? And I'm like, of course, my bad. You could hear all the elders. What are you talking about? We're right here. There are, of course, elders. There's for sure eldership in this world, and thank God for that. I was speaking more to my own experience in communities where there's often not elders living in the community. Can be difficult. Obviously, places there are elders living in the community, and it's amazing. They can help lead the way. But yeah, connecting elders, connecting children, and connecting everything in between with this community sense, village, that consciousness, what does the onboarding look like to move across that spectrum and find their place? Because I'm sure a lot of people do want a depth of community that's further than where they are, but they just don't know how. Kim, go ahead.
I think that there are probably a lot of different answers to this question. So I'm just offering one take, and it relates back to the Surgeon General's report about the epidemic of isolation and loneliness. Because I think something that was really profound to me in reading that is that there was evidence that and the language that was used in the report was place-based community, which is different than residential community, but it is in the same geographic area. And when we have that, our both like physical well-being increases, and also our ability to trust the people around us. And so there's actually a social connection that happens too. And the most common sort of place-based communities that we have are maybe places of worship, or just spiritual places, or within schools, or the sort of the communities that we create, activist groups, the kind of communities that we create in the physical location. And also what's interesting to me about that is that I think you mentioned, like, and we're in this digital world now where we have communities all the time. I'm in online communities all the time. And I think that there's a place for that too. They're very connecting. But what the report is pointing back to is place and physical, like being in the physical presence of people. And so that I want to throw out there as like one of the onboarding things is sometimes it's hard for some of us to like go into physical spaces and be in social situations. But I think the more we can kind of inch our way there and build or rebuild or sort of develop, some feelings of trust with people, those are some of our baby steps.
Appreciate that.
Mhm.
It often, I've asked elders before this question, and they're often like, food. Just get people together around food.
That's Indian culture, I'll tell you. That's what we do. It's so simple.
And that's the thing too that I'm really curious about is simplicity. I'll circle back to that. I want to hear what you have to say, Jamaica.
No, I think I think that it's beautiful and complex because I think as many different, you name, there's like the spectrum and there's so many different ways that community exists and that we find it and that we create it. And so I don't think there's any like, what's the onboarding? I think it's like, you really spoke to something, Kim. It's like I live in a place where like there are communities, there's people doing all the sorts of stuff all the time. And so I think sometimes I'm just going to name a part of it. I think visibility is part one. Is I think actually, even though we're like hyper networked, I think that we're hyper networked through a mirage of kind of debris, and finding the like signal through the noise of anything truly like meaningful that's just not sort of like like distracting or extractive in terms of those digital spaces is like the meaning making and sense making of, wait a minute, there are people out there, whether it's like finding online digital communities here to figure out who's in town. Like how I'd say it, for me, I had to be like, well, who's here? Because of course you're right, I'm going to find community. And I was like, right, I'm going to go to the local co-op food. I'm going to go to places where people do movement or coffee shops. And I'm going to go start like looking at boards and smiling at people and meeting them. And the way I actually got into communities, I just like started smiling at this beautiful checkout gal and we were chatting. And then I told her some of what I did. And she's like, oh, you're into that. Like it's actually, part of it is just being in a way of openness. And you really named something, I think, that's really important, Kim, is that's because of this loneliness, because of this sense of separation, because of whether it's community loneliness and isolation, or as Robin Wall Kimmerer puts it in Braiding Sweetgrass. And if you guys don't know that book, it's a tome, and she talks about species isolation. So again, I'm going to be the living systems girl. That's like, it originally stems from feeling disconnected from our sense of inherent belonging, and then that manifests itself through human communities. And I think that the mental health crisis and all of the things that are happening because we're trying to make interconnections through this digital sphere, which absolutely has a place, of course it does. I think that missing of just like smiling at somebody and being smiled at, or the simple like hello on a street, like it's those really simple moments of intimate personal connection. And it takes people who are struggling with that isolation and you know, the mental health issues and that crisis that we're facing. It's hard to put yourself out there. It's hard to trust that you can smile at somebody and they're going to smile back and not like throw a rock at you. Like there's so much of this sort of like the chicken and egg, like how do you get there and kind of sift through the debris of like the barrage of online stimulus, which has its place when done well, and the lack of just like, you know what your neighbor's name is and you come together around certain foods or celebrations, and yeah, the ritualization, or you just smile at somebody and that opens a connection. It's tricky. And I don't, from a place of like being deeply steeped in this, you know, movement, as you put it, Jasper, I don't want to underestimate the complexity and the different ways that each person has to find their own, you know, not only like purpose, as you said, but their own belonging, their own sense of finding that sense of connection. And I think that when we just sort of first return to our connection to an earth that's always holding us, it makes it a lot easier to navigate the human complexities. I just genuinely believe that if you feel held by a tree, that's a little more safe sometimes than all these dynamic human relationships. That sense of just personal coherence and starting there sometimes is actually the path to community. Is right, I need to be safe and okay in the world. What do I do with those practices? And then how do I find people that, you know, that feel like we can be in that together? I think communities of food, of practice, of purpose, you know, spirituality, you know, rallying around the similar cause, schools. I think it actually is really important to not set the lofty ideal of village so high that everyone's like, I don't even know how to start with my immediate daily interactions and the people right around me. And so I just am like, you know, coming back to sense of I belong on this planet and I'm held by this earth, and reforging those relationships of care and connection with earth is a place of starting to build resilience and coherence for people who feel really lost and alone. And it's much easier than to imagine starting to sort of lightly engage in finding places of meaning and relationships of meaning. So it's like, it's so complex. And I get asked this a lot because I work in that more like high level, how are we going to change the entire system and make sure it's like implemented on the ground? And I think missing the like very intimate, slow process of relationship building and just finding the most true way for that one person to reach out a little and make a connection with another person, to me, is how community really starts. It really just starts with that. And that means we have to keep creating spaces of care for people to edge into and find like an opening, you know? And so as somebody who's very gregarious, I go create openings. I smile at people all the time. I'll sit down next to someone and not invade their space, but just like, how are you today? To children, I make sure to smile at every single child I see. I'm like, hi, or like, oh, don't cross the road yet. Like, to me, it's sort of like, you don't have to invade someone else's personal space, but starting to become, again, that practice of village, of just being open to connecting. You don't ever know how much it's going to change somebody. You don't ever know how somebody's like, nobody looks me in the eye. Nobody says hi to me today. How am I supposed to put myself out there in my community? And you're the one person that just says, hello, how are you? And I do think doing that with children in our own communities, whether we know them or not, and doing that with people who are eldered or disabled or in some ways marginalized, and just continuing to be a person who says hello and creates a space of opening, to me, is the only way we actually create the foraging beginning of community. So I'm going to take from the complexity, make it simple. And the other thing on a complex level, and I'll leave it at this, certainly the work we do with Open Future Coalition is creating, okay, let's use the digital tools well and wisely. And instead of like TikTok and whatever these fast food versions of connection that happen online, let's create depth and meaning. I know you're doing that too with Revillager. Let's create these spaces that allow us to go and kind of find what's happening in my own community. Where can I find people that are interested in the things I'm interested in? How do I even begin to like find somebody who cares about foraging, wild foraging, or who cares about permaculture, or cares about the things I care about? And how do I find that? So creating digital spaces that guide people back to their own communities and helping communities start to organize around things that they care about and practices they care about is definitely the tools we've been building. And then kind of how that can scale into like bioregional hubs and places where there's incredible investment going right now into community hubs that provide resources for communities to organize and gather and share food and grow food and start securing their water resources and all those other survival aspects you talked about, Zamir, so beautifully. There's like the beauty, soulfulness of village, and there's the practical survival. And I think we're at a time where we deeply need both. I don't think we can like skip over the need, like we need resilience in communities deeply. And we're going to have to find ourselves interdependent, whether we want to or not, because that's sort of where things are trending with the way that we've disconnected. And soulfully, we want that sense of belonging. More than anything, our hearts long, I think, to just simply belong. And I think anywhere we can help create that sense of like of belonging and self-reliance and self-resilience in community is really essential at this time of like transition and adaptation towards what I think is nothing less than a collective rite of passage. I just do. I think we're at a threshold. I think we're at a spiritual threshold as a collective, pressing against, you said it, the maturing of a species. And I think we've played out a certain timeline of a species that's been disconnected and kind of separated, and we're returning. I believe inherently in my heart, we're returning again to a sense of like, this is not something that can be done alone, nor should it, nor do we want it to be. We'd like to be together in this. I think there's something transpiring, and we're just here part of like helping ticket just a little bit, creating opportunities for ritualizing and understanding this collective shift and giving meaning and sense making so we can all participate in deciding that this actually has to be done together. This is not something that can be done on the hero's journey, isolated, off by ourselves. We deeply need each other. And I think we deeply want each other at the heart of it. And I think that I'm kind of going across the span, but I think that's what I'm naming is like, it's from the very simple interactions on a daily basis to the like complex system level shift of facilitating something that got broken that we're trying to heal and mend right now. And I think we have to approach it in a lot of different places for whatever your gift is. My gift is to span both. Some people, your gift is, I'm going to do this in my own community. I'm going to put out an art circle. I love doing art and I'd love other people to come and drink coffee with me and do art. That's what I can do. Or like, I'm going to start this community garden or go join my community garden. That's exactly what that person's purpose and goal and like passion is. They should do that. And those who are like, right, systems change and big movements of change, we should keep doing that. That's all the spectrum, as you guys keep talking about, is necessary for this greater collective shift. But I think that idealizing something that feels inaccessible to people is why we keep repeating a pattern of feeling isolated and left out of something that I think is actually inherent within us. It's all around us. We're always woven into it. And as soon as we remember we're woven into it, it starts changing our frame of reference to safety, that like you do belong on this planet. And this planet loves you and is holding all of us very, very lovingly, even in the midst of its like shaking. I think it's holding us with care and just wants to be remembered too. And I always think that's such a foundational, fundamental, personal place to begin. And then you can start thinking about how do you do this with other humans. So I'll leave it at that because I am getting into complexity, but I want to acknowledge it's complex. I want to acknowledge it's a lot of things and it's diverse and it's dynamic. So it's like find the thing that means something to you and make that the thing that you commit and devote to, because it brings you joy and it brings you life. And from that, you can give more life. And I think when we just do that, then whatever spectrum we're on and whatever part we play is exactly what we should be doing, you know, without needing to be anything other than what we already are and giving anything other than what we have to give, you know. It's a lot, so I'll leave it at that.
I really appreciate your brain and the way you verbalize all of it. I do feel like there's something around that paradox of simplicity and complexity. I find in my own brain, and I think for a lot of people, when we get too wrapped up in the complexity, it can be overwhelming. And you know, the way to, as you were saying, Zamir, to chop wood and to be in village in such a simple way, there's a beauty in that as well. And I really feel like we can over conceptualize things, and there is absolutely this meta crises and this need to look at big systems and big pictures and come up with systems that can last the change that is naturally happening. And then there's also just the, as you said as well, like just people needing to be able to do something, you know, where they're at. You know, there are so many people out there who are working jobs and have kids, and they just want to be able to connect, and they're not able to be on these meta levels of systems, but they're able to, you know, find ways to be with their neighbors, or maybe not, and they're looking for that, and they're looking for real life connection, and I really feel like real life connection, as you were saying, Kim, is massive. And I think about you know, that spiritual idea of the teachings being like a gate. And when you get to the gate, if you fall in love with the gate and you don't go through the gate, you're missing the point. You know, there's the whole point of the gate is to bring you to the other side. And I feel like that with social media and technology right now, it's this incredible gateway into connection. Just so much potential and positive, and there is positive things happening for sure, thanks to our technological advancements, which are also extremely complex. However, I think as a culture we've gotten too immersed in the gate and into the technology, and we're not going through to what is on the other side, which is the actual person. So I'm really curious to investigate that a bit, but I see your hand up, Zamir. I'd love to hear what you have to share.
I just wanted to share, as we're on this topic of, you know, emergence, and that's when I first met Ian years ago in 2012, hosting a gathering called Emergence, and we got together for a year, met every week to see what was going to emerge, and nothing emerged except us meeting every week. But we learned a lot about that process, and it can be humbling. I in the process of exploring both spiritually in the yoga tradition, which is largely around this goal of self-transcendence. It's a transcendent spirituality. And then there's my exploring, I trained in this modality with Dr. Gabor Mate called compassionate inquiry. And where it came about, the reason I needed to train was because leading people in yoga trainings, especially teacher trainings, like a month long, it brought up all these issues that are in the tissues. And a lot of these things are related to our attachment traumas, you know, and they're rooted in our early childhood experience. And then they're coming up, and I didn't know how to help them. I was like, I don't know how to help you. That it's not part of my training. Like you just need to be detached. But that's not the answer. So I was like, oh, I need to help. I need to learn how to help people. And I encountered Gabor's work in a program called Beyond Addiction, the Yogic Path to Recovery. So it had connected, and then I decided to study with him. So my interest over the years has been, is there a place for these two to be met, which is this embedded relationality, where we are human beings with a fundamental need to be taken care of. That's our primary attachment need. We want to feel taken care of. We want to know that we'll be taken care of. Get so deep. And in order to know that, our nervous system is different from reptiles, or when we say someone's cold-blooded, it's like you are not of the same like orientation, right? I mean, if a reptile has a child, that's it. It's gone. There's no bonding necessary. There's no bonding. But mammals are different. Irrespective, any kind of mammal, there's a bonding period, right? And humans have the longest bonding period because we need to deep feely that bonding and taking care of is necessary for our healthy development. So we need that. And so for our healthy development, we need village or some semblance of it, right? And so the degree to which we can create that optimally, most informed by our compassion and our wisdom, means a more healthy human being, a more whole, well-developed human being. And so that's worth doing it for that reason. And we also, as we find those needs are fully met, if we look at Maslow's work, he defines these two forms of needs. One are called, I would say there's different needs, right? You have your physiological, then you have safety, and then you have belonging and self-esteem, right? And then you have self-actualization. And it's not just a pyramid, but he defined that you have different motivations. And there's what he calls deficiency motivations, and then, higher motivations. And so when we're seeking out community because we're feeling this deep lack, like I don't feel safe, I don't feel belonging, like I don't feel good about myself, what happens is we do need it, but it's often we need to heal it, right? Like we need each other. What was broken in relationship needs to be healed in relationship. So we're like, where can I find the context? And in our nuclear world, with like, speaking of Valentine's Day, it's like I need for one other person to help heal all of that for me. And we realize that the divorce rate is like 60-70% now. We know it's not working. Like we need collectives to heal our attachment, right? And in the process, how do we become more, the whole idea is to transcend the deficiency consciousness, the lack consciousness, in order to say, how can I then hold space and give back, right? In the teepee model of development, which Maslow borrowed from the Blackfoot Indians, they have self-actualization on the bottom, and above that, they have community actualization. That's the purpose of self-actualization, is to take you to the point where you are now focused on the actualization of the community. And the top of the pyramid is cultural perpetuity, not just a community, but a culture that is able to nourish the continuity of community. And we can't do that without village. You can't do it without village. That higher level of actualization beyond the individual requires village of some form. And I feel like that's a higher purpose for us if we are to, in the words of Tagore, only those who plant trees knowing they may never sit in their shade have begun to know the true meaning of life. I feel like if we are drawn to village for that, not that we have to, like I said, there's many reasons, but those listening feel this sense of, yes, I'm doing this village and partly for me, but this is what's needed for my children or my next generation. The nobility of that impulse will ensure that we create something that's not dysfunctional, right? I think.
Well said. Well said. It reminds me of Stephen Jenkinson was taking questions, and I asked, how do we get through this thing called village, especially in a village where I live with no elders? And he said, try and fail. Which is a very, very Stephen answer.
Right.
But he said it's not about you. Make a little further step for your kids. And this thing isn't gonna switch overnight. And I think understanding that flow and that patience and that growth model of nature, and planting a seed that we're not going to feel the shade of, it's really humbling to be in when you're so passionate and when you do have kids. you know, that you want them to grow up in a better place, or in a world that can sustain them, you know, and give them their own actualization. But I really appreciate the piece around the community actualization, and I'm sure we've all had the experience living in community where people are magnetized to it who have a lot of trauma, you know, a lot of mental health things that they need to work through, and they see community as an answer.
Yeah, that's our
But
biggest
often,
challenge here at Awake, onboarding people who like, you know, we're at this place and we're community and people come and they expect this like beautiful, loving container to like welcome you and welcome to our community and you're going to be included in everything. And then it's like, well, we can't hold that for everybody, you know, and that becomes challenging. How do you do that?
absolutely,
You know?
absolutely. Yeah, and it questions a lot about the inclusivity of the community and what it can hold. I mean, there's levels of mental health that, you know, it's hard to hold. And um it's definitely a question of, like you said, you know, how do we self-actualize as we're being in this relational matrix, as Ian would say. You know, one of my jokes was if I were to be the benevolent dictator of a community, you know, one of my rules would be everyone has a therapist who's outside of the community, you know, who has no stake in the ground. And everyone has got that inner work that they're doing, obviously in their own way. And I'm not going to be a dictator about it, but there's something around the radical self-responsibility that comes into play. I know
Sorry, I know
Jamaica.
that. Yeah, I know. I want to hear from Kim too, but acknowledging I have a little human, so my time today is shorter than
Mhm.
the rest of the panelists because I have to go pick up a little human. But I thought I would just offer something that I had thought about, but then didn't end up saying because I went somewhere else. Is a lot of the work that I am doing right now also is story, and I think story is a commons space, a hearth, if you will,
Mm.
when we have the opportunities to share, and again, digital and in-person spaces, there's lots of ways for this to happen. But I have a lot of passion right now and have done a lot of work around, and I'm working with an organization who works with Indigenous storytellers. But I just feel like story is one of those common spaces. And we find ways to begin telling our stories and sharing stories. It's both like that. I think it's the nervous systeming of collective wisdom and intelligence that happens through sense making and story. I think it's the stories of place that are really, really, really important to sort of reorient ourselves and sense make our sense of place and interconnectedness with place. And I think there's stories that are intercultural that are really important to sort of see the unique expression, the explosion of beautiful diversity of ways to express. And then the commonality of those things, like the origin stories where you find across the globe, but there's these like patterns and symbols and archetypes that are actually very common or repeating storylines. And I just think story is one of those places. Some of the work we're getting prepped to do is sort of taking some people that might be divided in community by political divides, say around a watershed, and you have very different interests, and you're going to come with that hat on with your political expression or your sense of like how you want to kind of bring into the conversation, and using story as sort of a method of dismantling that positionality to just sort of share our insights and our perspectives and our challenges and our struggles and what we're hoping for, we're wanting for, and letting that start to sort of show what really at the heart is there and what's really actually wanted by a lot of people that maybe have these different divides when you put them into a room together. But when you really get down to shared stories, you start to uncover things that actually aren't so different. And I think that story is such an incredible methodology for community building, placemaking, sense making, and then that intersection of we work with sort of local resilience and local application and global knowledge commons, global sharing. And I don't think it's just knowledge. I think it's also wisdom, even intergenerational stories. Like that is the way we learn for so very long. It was stories that were passed that inherently through story, even if it wasn't like, I'm going to tell you a direct bit of information through story, we were carrying these codes of knowledge and wisdom and information. It's the most deeply embedded part, I think, of what makes us unique as humans is our ability to share story through song, through dance, through multimedia ways. So I just want to name that in this space. It just felt really juicy and alive to sort of acknowledge that that is one way I also think we can find a sense of that villaging is beginning to have story and hearth be the way that we start to sort of work across divides and start to listen and have a place to express and find things that are sort of maps to this thing called a village through the sense of being at like story is the way. For me, like village is a verb. To me, story is a path, and it's a journey to be had together and a way to come together in different ways. So I'll just acknowledge that. And also just this lovely conversation. I could go on for hours. This is like so much passion space. And those of you who've been listening, and I love the comments, every single one of them, a very rich chat. And just appreciate, Ian and John and the rest of the team for holding a space for this kind of really beautiful and important dialogue today. So I'm going to gracefully, slowly back out because I think this conversation can just like keep blossoming. And thank you all for just continuing on your journey, your insights and wisdom. And thanks for humaning together today for a little while.
Thanks, Jamaica. Really appreciate you being here. And thanks for your shares. Go get that little one. And yeah, we are starting to wrap up into the hour where we're closing. And I just acknowledge that this is the end of the summit. And with any kind of ending, I feel like it's really important. Part of the closure is to kind of feel into what is the integration, of what we've been talking about and learning. And the summit's been going for 5 days, and the movie took 7 years. And there's so much richness and so many beautiful ideas here. And I know for myself, there's always this question around, how do I take this and apply it into my daily life? What does this mean to me? And something that also comes up for me is, we are all right now connected on technology, right? And there's this paradox of feeling around technology for good reason. There's the fact that we're all integrated on it. We can do things that we've never been able to do on it. We can connect with teachers and lessons and people in ways that we never could. And there's also the fears and the phobia and the just the valid anxiety around the level to which it's accelerating without many guide rails, and the ways and the intentions behind a lot of these technologies. And I'm curious, playing into that idea of how to integrate, what are the ways in which we can use not just the technologies of digital technologies, but the technologies of, the models and systems of what we've learned, the modalities, the practices. Yeah, what do you think is really important for someone listening to this to understand about how to really apply all of these, like just the concept of villaging to where they're at now? And how do we bring that into our local? Because as we're talking about, it's very in person. So wherever you're at in the world, you do have a local group of people. How can we bring that to them, and how can we use technology to serve that, if possible? Yeah, Kim, do you have any thoughts on that? I know you're kind of spanning both worlds in a lot of ways, and yeah, I'm curious what you think.
Yeah, I wish we had more time.
Yeah. Good question at the very end.
I just think the answer. Yeah, I mean, I think we've actually in some ways have touched on the integration piece quite a bit, and just in naming the sort of small things that we can do to both either feel connected to the humans around us, whether that's in line or in line while shopping, or in more intentional spaces. And then we've also touched on the practice of really knowing ourselves. I think when we do our own work, then we can really show up and take the self responsibility, as you were naming, and also like let ourselves be messy, because we know that we're okay when we can be comfortable in the uncomfortable. So I guess my answer is a little encouragement of that too. And yeah, you're right that I straddle these worlds a little bit, because I'm both live in community and residential community, and I also help run an online organization talking about how we should actually be in physical space together. And so I'm very aware of the irony of that, but can be, you know, a launch pad too, or just a place to step into to begin. And I did put in the chat FIC's website so you could go and explore there a little bit more. And because the ways we can bring the digital technology is in these sort of forum spaces or discussion spaces, or we also host courses and events too, so we can be in these Zoom rooms. But that might be just the encouragement to kind of then step out of the digital world and into the more practical with humans. Okay, I want to hear from Samir too, so stop there.
Is it the same question? Or just closing thoughts on this whole shindig over the last few days?
We can definitely do closing thoughts.
Okay.
And I'm curious also. I feel like all three of us kind of bridge this gap of being a very intensely in-person community, living in, you know, co-living space, and also having multiple communities online, and also running businesses online that focus on communities online, you know, and it's a weird thing. Like, I make the joke all the time, like, I created an app to get people to get off their phone. Like, that's a terrible, terrible business plan. But there, I did it.
Big
And
animal.
yeah, I'm just curious, you know, Zamir, your own experience, and definitely any reflections on the summit are welcome.
Well, what's most alive for me is the about 12 or 14 years ago, I heard these words by Thich Nhat Hanh, Buddhist Zen master, and he said the future Buddha may come in the form of a sangha, a community practicing loving kindness and mindful living, and this may be the most important thing for the future of our earth. And every time I say it, I feel those same shivers on my skin, like from the moment that I first heard that, because my heart said, yes, I devote my life to that possibility. And I've been following that as a North Star since then. And I feel that as I've come to explore both the mystics and also the relational psychologists, you know, in these different spheres in yoga, I've come to see that, you know, the self is not fixed. We are a process. The reason why you could say village is a verb is because the person is a verb. Each individual is a process. It's a living process. And one of the core insights of the Buddha is that, you know, who you think you are as a solid entity is not you. How can we lean into this constant state of becoming, of being and becoming? And my leaning edge is that there are these, I've heard the word mycelial or imaginal cells. We use more and more biological metaphors, speaking of story, to try to make sense of this emergent process that's happening. And places like Tamara have committed to create a sangha, because a sangha exists when there's a shared practice, a practice devoted to understanding what is true. Like, what is true, and love and truth, or love and wisdom, you know, and whatever practice or community that is you are sharing space with to investigate love and wisdom, to investigate what is more truthful, becomes an accelerator for your own healing, your own awakening, your own being and becoming. It's easier and faster. That's why the Buddha gave the 3 jewels: the Buddha, the awakened consciousness, the Dharma, the teachings that arise from that consciousness, and the Sangha, the community that holds that and practices that way. And it doesn't seem like it's going to come in the form of single individuals who are all omniscient. that everybody is circling around. We're going to find collective practices of inquiry, and villaging will form around that. And how we do that, in the past, it used to be more monastic. You didn't have children and kids running around, but now we're trying to bring these worlds together. Because I know a lot of people listening here are deep inquirers and spiritual seekers, and they're on the path of evolution and becoming, but they're also in a path of relationality and having family and children. And that's where the messiness is, because we're all coming together with this. We're not satisfied by just meeting the lower levels of Maslow's hierarchy. That's not what this represents now. Oh yeah, I'm safe, I have belonging, everybody likes me, like that's not enough. We want to grow and expand, but we know what we have to transcend and include. So I feel like these projects, the community that's gathered here is in this inquiry, and we are being utilized in the ways that we come together. If we're really sincere in our longing, it will reveal many approaches and paths, many insights, and many such documentaries will be made about our community and your community and another one, and all these different ways, right, will be shown to illuminate these fractals of what we all represent. And I think that's so exciting. For me, that gives me hope. Not that I peddle hope and not that I need it. I have, in Sikhism, my grandmother always used to say chardi kala. Chardi kala means courageous optimism. It's not hope. It's called courageous optimism. So I have that in my heart, but I feel it. I experience that as I see this gathering and these kinds of explorations. It's enriching for me that way.
I appreciate that. Yeah, it's certainly courage, optimism, bravery, all of these.
And the internet supports this, right? Like that's the reason why we can learn about all these things, I mean, I think that's amazing. If we can use our digital and create a digital commons that provides accessible education, to have the networks feed forward and feed back the most important information, insights, discoveries, resources, whether it's crypto or whether it's voting or knowledge exchange. I mean, wow, we can win.
Thank goodness. And you said he didn't have hope. Awesome. Well, yeah, just getting close to closing. Kim, do you have any last reflections on anything from conversation or otherwise?
No, I feel very complete about. I'm so glad to have been here today to be a part of this conversation. Thank you so much, and thanks for everyone listening and joining in on the chats.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Jasper, for facilitating it.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate it. And it's been so fun. And yeah, there are actually resources coming up, courses and such to continue this journey of revillaging. And I'm really grateful that there are so many communities online right now that are speaking about these topics. And I think as we continue to understand, the why, we'll continue to understand the how. And I really believe that I think you were speaking to, Zamir, kind of a reaction to the earth, just the way that Alan Watts used to say, the apple tree apples, the earth peoples, and there's just it's just this feeling of like, yeah, we're doing it. It's hard, it's messy, but it's also beautiful, and everyone has their own way. And I think it was Thich Nhat Hanh, but I'm not sure. But it's the saying is, there's not the best way, there's a way. So I really believe that we'll find our way. We'll find a way. So thank you so much, everyone. Really appreciate it. Thank you, everyone, for listening.
Yeah, and I just want to thank you all as well. I mean, that just from my end was like, I can't think the panels could keep getting better. And you all nailed it. Like that was amazing. Pamela, we're gonna have to close in a second. I wonder if maybe you could put your question in chat. So I was about to do a closing, but would love to hear it from you. And just let everybody know, thank you for being here these last 5 days. And we're gonna have one more session tomorrow morning, a bonus session where we have some of the leaders from the ISTA sacred temple arts, sexuality community, talking about their like ethical restructuring, rupture, repair, like really amazing conversation about what it is when like power dynamics and like these things we all know about, like sexual dynamics, other things happen in community, which is going to happen. And can we do it in a way that doesn't, can that happen and hurts happen? And we repair in a way that makes community stronger and safer. That's the conversation happening tomorrow. Really juicy. First time ever they're speaking publicly about it. So I'm really excited. And we have a community online in school. You can join to just dialogue with us more. We have a beautiful online course, all these topics deeper. And we're going to keep doing this. We're going to bring people like Kim and Zamir and Jasper once a month at the least to keep having these dialogues, building towards another summit in the fall, which will be like the final big push of the film out into the world. Thank you all, somebody. Thank you again, Kim, Zamir, Jasper, and Jamaica with her little daughter out there. This has been amazing. We will put this recording somewhere that you three can have it and share with your communities. And please remember, the film is now available for like, I think 5 more days through the weekend by popular demand. People are asking, so please share it. Please, Kim and Jameer and Jasper, you guys can share it with your networks, other email blasts, because this is a bottom-up, self-organizing movement, and we need that support of you all to get this message out in the world. So thank you all. And I was seeing, and yeah, and please write to us. I didn't see your question come through, Pamela, but we'd love to engage. So please write to us. I can put our email here in the chat. We'd love to hear from you and keep this dialogue going. Yeah, thank you, everybody. We're a little past time, so I don't want to keep anybody, but thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank you
everyone.
so much. Bye, everybody. Ciao for now.